just had him in back. A little bit about the train that you're riding on today. These 3 cars are all built by Mr. George Pullman himself. George Pullman was maybe not the first manufacturer of parlor cars in rail service, but he surely was the best and perfected the model. George Pullman started his company after the Civil War, really wanted to make rail travel luxurious for folks traveling from point A to point B. Back in the day, the primary travel then was either by riverboat or steamship, down riverways or down along the coastline, or it was rough it on a covered wagon pulled by a train of horses. And as rail service started to pop up and the Transcontinental Railroad was complete, connecting the Pacific Ocean coast with the Atlantic Ocean coast, rail service really took off and folks bought into the model as well. Now, even though rail travel was becoming a necessity, that does not mean that it was a comfortable way to travel either. George Pullman rode a train that ran down from Syracuse, New York to Albany and down to New York City. He describes it more painful than being in a Civil War Confederate prison.
Wow.
So he had this brilliant idea of making a palace on wheels, and that's what he called his first parlor car that he built, a palace car.
My apologies for the
So
delay.
it was pretty successful.
Thank you.
His company lasted for well over 70 years until the end of the major railroad lines that consolidated into Amtrak.
Happy 10 years.
So the 3 cars that you're riding on today. It's a 4-car train, but 3 cars are Pullman cars that everybody's riding on. The Middletown, which is the farthest north car, in the blue exterior paint with the gold trim and white roof. That was an observation car, originally built and named the Capitol Road that ran on the Capitol Limited from Washington, D.C. and Chicago on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. It was, in addition to it being an observation car, it was also a lounge car and a sleeper. It would cost a pretty penny to be one of those select few that got to ride in that car and spend your entire rail journey, whether it was north, south, east, or west. Looking out the south, looking out that observation deck and seeing the rails and cross ties roll back. It was the way that you saw America back in that day. Now the 2 green cars that most of you were riding on, the Meriden and the Wallingford. The Meriden has the blue trim, the blue interior paint, I should say, with the purple, red, maroon type colors on the curtains.
Nope.
Now, the Meriden was actually local to the region that we're traveling here in southern Connecticut. The Meriden was originally named the Provincetown, which ran on the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad back in the 1920s. It was later renamed the Plymouth. When it came here to the Valley Railroad in the 1990s, it was renamed the Meriden. The Wallingford is a little bit more special than that. The Wallingford, for a couple reasons, was also local to the region, ran on the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad.
Thank you very much.
When it was acquired, it was actually the first parlor car that the Tourist Valley Railroad acquired in 1978. And as they were stripping away the old red paint from the Kansas City and Southern colors that the car had fallen into the hands of after the end of the New Haven Railroad, they originally thought the car's name was the Taunton. But they found the old stenciling, and it was indeed the Wallingford, and they decided to keep the legacy alive.
Thank you.
As George Pullman became more and more famous, he really thought to bring an extra added personal touch to his line of first-class parlor cars was to give them names instead of numbers. It sounded a lot better to say that I rode across the country riding on the Meriden, the Wallingford, or the Middletown, rather than saying, I ran across the country in a car 5432. Definitely gives it a little bit of a personal touch. And the Pullman porters that would ride these cars would definitely feel the personality and identity of the passengers in the car itself. Now, even though these cars date back to the 1920s, they are not the oldest part of our ride today. The actual oldest part lies beneath our feet, underneath the wheels of our train today. The line, the rails, and the cross ties date all the way back to 1871. It was originally part of the Connecticut Valley Railroad that ran from Hartford down to Old Saybrook, connecting all the small river valley towns from central Connecticut down to the Long Island Sound. Towns like Middletown, Deep River, Essex. North of Middletown, it was Cromwell, Rocky Hill, and Weathersfield, excuse me. For those of you that are local to the area, if you ever drive through Middletown and you cross Washington Street to get on Route 9, you cross some railroad tracks. That is indeed the northern end of the Valley Railroad line. It's owned today by a freight company that runs freight from Middletown up to Hartford, but it is part of the original Connecticut Valley line dated back to the 1870s. Connecticut Valley Railroad ran its first train. It was later absorbed by the New Haven Railroad, went into abandonment in the 1960s. It was later purchased by the state of Connecticut, and it was around that same time as the state purchased the right-of-way. A small group of railroad enthusiasts were looking for a place to park their steam engines and run tourist excursions permanently instead of going from town to town. They struck up a deal with the state of Connecticut, and the Valley Railroad Company was born, running its first train exactly 100 years to the day on July 29th, 1971, from the original first run on the Connecticut Valley line. So tonight, folks, I encourage you, I've thrown a lot of dates and a lot of history at you, but as you look around, this may be the closest thing that you'll ever experience to a time machine. So I encourage you tonight to put down the cell phones, enjoy the company, enjoy the meal, and really enjoy the views. We haven't made it to the Connecticut River yet, but we'll be there in about 10 minutes or so, about a mile and a half. So sit back, relax, and let's not forget that it's not about making a great time tonight, it's about having a great time. So welcome aboard the Essex Clippard Intertrain. Again, I am your conductor, Carmen. I'll be walking through the train, just checking on everything to make sure everything's all right. If you need anything, ask your servers, or you can feel free to grab me as I'm walking through. Welcome aboard. We'll be down at the Connecticut Valley in just a few moments. Pratt's Cove is stretches well over 200 acres. Now, right now it's low tide, but all the wild rice down here is great for the wildlife that inhabited this area. If you look out by the chrome trailer across the cove, there's two osprey platforms that are kind of running across that bank of the cove. Ospreys build their nest there. Makes it easier for them to lay their eggs and raise the babies while being up there safe and away from predators. So definitely great herring can be found here. Egrets, blue heron, the occasional eagle. We saw actually an eagle today on an earlier trip. Swans, definitely, ducks. It's a beautiful area here, especially if you like to kayak or canoe. If you're out kayaking and coming towards the railroad, you would have no idea there's actually a traffic place here if you didn't know that. And even though this is the largest tidal marsh on the Connecticut River, even though it doesn't look like it, I should say, beyond the trees across from us continues Pratt's Cove into Post Cove. Now, back when the railroad was built, they had no such terms as tidal marshes or tidal estuaries, so this was just blanketly considered a swamp, and manufacturing and farming was prohibited from building here due to the soft wetness of the land. So anything close to the wetland here was not desired, let's put it that way. So the railroad was given the opportunity to build its line right along it. Now, if a line was built today, there would be no way that the Environmental Protection Agency or the DEEP here in Connecticut would allow any construction close to a beautiful wetland like this here in Deep River. And because we saw the wetland and Pratt's Cove, that means we're coming right up on the Connecticut River as we enter Deep River, Connecticut. You'll see the Deep River Marina as the boats are across from us now. We'll be rolling through Deep River Landing, and you'll get to see a treat. Some of you saw the steam locomotive leave earlier before we departed Essex. That train's waiting for its final boat passengers up at Essex. Don't worry, it's not on the same track as us. It's waiting on a passing track for the Becky Thatcher or Riverboat to return so that they could go home for the night. Deep River, here at Deep River Landing, is the only place in the world where a steam locomotive and a riverboat meet and exchange passengers. It's the only place left in the world remaining that occurrence happens regularly. And it happens right here in Deep River. Locomotive 40 actually turned 100 years old this year. It was August 19th. Came out of the Schenectady
How's everything so far, folks?
American Locomotive Shop.
Take your place.
Thank you.
What do you get for another glass of champagne?
Actually, can I get a glass of,
I'm sure the crew will be out there waving.
Merlot.
The Merlot? Merlot, absolutely. Anything for you?
No, I'm good, thank you.
They always, they're jealous they're not getting the fine food that they're getting this evening. That you guys are.
You're so great.
Eustacia Island is a small island that's right across from us currently, and then we'll actually get to see the largest island on the Connecticut River, seldom met after we pass the train. The steam is not an effect coming from that steam locomotive. A fireman actually shovels the coal to produce the steam. There's a two-man crew with an engineer and a fireman on board the steam locomotive. Definitely a sight to see when that train's climbing up the hill that we just came off of.
I bet.
We got a couple folks, part of our train crew, out there waving to us as we pass River Street Crossing. There'll be a gentleman in a jacket, older gentleman with white hair. Mr. Paul Lewis is the
Caramel apple.
longest serving employee here on the Valley Railroad, dating back to the first train running back in 1971. He'll be celebrating 50 years of service next year.
Can I have a glass of Merlot for you?
we have come to a nice easy stop here at what we call on the railroad, Riverside. We're very original with our names. This is actually the closest that the water actually comes to the rails and to the right-of-way. I would say there's two locations, nice scenic overlooks on the line that we'll see tonight. This is one of them for sure, and the other one is about 3 miles north of us right now. And the formal introduction here is, this is the Connecticut River, or the Great River as they call it. A couple things I'll point out to you before we continue north. If you look out actually to the 2 o'clock position, you'll see our riverboat, the Becky Thatcher, bringing back its final group of passengers. Coming down the steamboat channel now to meet the coach train. And right above the Becky Thatcher, you see a small castle sitting on the side of a cliff on the Seven Sister Hills across from the Connecticut River. That's Gillette's Castle. I'll let you know a little bit more about that when we get closer. We will get a real nice view of that one, about 2 miles or so. Now, directly across from us is not the east bank of the Connecticut River, as you would think. That is the largest island on the Connecticut River. That is Seldom Neck. Now, Seldom Neck is half a mile wide and 1.5 miles long, well over 600 acres of land in total. It's owned by the state of Connecticut and is actually a state park now called Seldom Neck State Park. But if you go back about 130 years ago, this island was privately owned. It was used for the granite that was quarried on the island. It was shipped by boat down to New York City by a company that was eventually used to pave the streets of Manhattan Island and all the other boroughs of New York City. And after the paving project was done in Manhattan, the island was sold by the company to the state of Connecticut, where it became, as I said before, Seldom Neck State Park. What's also interesting about Seldom Neck is there is not an access road to get to it. There is not any roads on the island, as a matter of fact. The only way to get there is by boat or to swim. Most people get there by boat, but it's a great spot. A lot of folks go camping. There's a lot of campground sites out there. But again, you have to get there by boat. So if you venture out in your kayak or canoe, you can paddle across the Connecticut River here, or take your electric boat across and tie it up and enjoy, whether it's a nice hike up on Seldom Neck or spend a couple days camping underneath the stars. The other side of the island is not nearly as wide as it is here, so most folks launch their kayaks or small boats from the opposite side, from the east bank. Now, the Connecticut River in itself stretches well over 400 miles long, going from the southern end of the Long Island Sound all the way to the north of the Canadian border. Now, the Connecticut River, as I said, was known as the Great River. It was not always great, though, let me tell you that. Despite the wildlife that I told you about and that you may see today, this was actually one of the most polluted rivers in the country, definitely the most polluted in the Northeast if you go back about 50 years ago. Back then, there was no environmental protection or anything like that. Manufacturers, other companies, and even your average Connecticut resident would just dump whatever they want into the Connecticut River. The river was actually deemed to be Class D, which was unsafe for human contact, and it actually really did a lot of damage to the wildlife here, including the fish that would swim up and down the river and the birds. But thanks to the Clean Water Act of 1972, resources were put in, and the Great River was reborn again. And as you can see, definitely safe for all types of water sports and water activities, and the wildlife and animal life has come back very, very strong, which we're very happy about that. And since then, it's one of the cleanest rivers in the country. It's actually the only national blueway in the United States to this day. And there's the Becky Thatcher coming down the steamboat channel, headed to Deep River Landing to drop all those folks off at the steam train. We'll be getting ready to head north. What's going to happen here, folks, is we'll The line runs right along the river for about another 2 miles, so I'll point out a couple other things before we snake inland for a little bit until we get up to East Haddam where we'll meet the Connecticut River again. So I'll let Engineer Hal know it's time to head north. Salads are coming out, and hopefully the appetizers and drinks were excellent and to your liking. We're heading north, folks, all the way up to East Haddam, good speed station. Now, contrary to the fact that you may think, folks, Seldom Neck is not a part, that island is not a part of Deep River, Connecticut. It's actually a part of Lyme, Connecticut. So, Connecticut River, back in the day, when they were drawing county borders, town lines, and even state borders, they used geography to assist them. Why make up a fake border if you have somewhere it was a mountain, a set of hills, or a prime location that you could use as a divider? That's where the Connecticut River did come in. That across there, they used the river as a county line. So on the other side is Lyme, Connecticut. That's in London County. This is Middlesex County. And they did the same thing even for a state border. The river runs from Connecticut, bisects the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it is the state border between Vermont and New Hampshire as it runs all the way up to the Canadian line.
Eat all the cormorants.
The tide's rolling out. Earlier today was at high tide around noon today. Definitely tell the water level was up, but it's still a good level. It's definitely not completely low tide, or we have not bottomed out yet at that time. So we'll be sure to see a couple more things. I'll tell you a little bit about Gillette's Castle once we get closer, and let you know a little bit about a film that was actually produced and directed right here in Chester, Connecticut, as we head over the line. Back in the 1960s, two very famous actors were part of that film. And we're heading into Chester, Connecticut. We'll roll over 2 trestles, Deep River Creek and Chester Creek, part of some tidal marsh areas as well, and be on the lookout for some egrets that wade in the water, especially as low tide comes. You'll be surprised what you see out there at low tide, especially from a bird standpoint and a wildlife perspective. So enjoy, folks, and I'll come back to you soon with some more information and historical facts about the river. Here. But Gillette's Castle has no relationship or anything to do with, for that fact, of the Razor Blade Company or the Patriots football stadium. Gillette's Castle is named after its primary resident, William Gillette. William Gillette lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He oversaw the construction of that castle and bought all 110 acres to make a nice little summer home for himself from 1919 until his death in 1937. Now, Mr. Gillette may not be a household name for any of us, for that fact,
I'm okay.
but Mr. Gillette was known very famously for his portrayal on stage as Sherlock Holmes. So what we know of today as the cap, the monocle, the cape, the pipe, all that, the colors, all thanks to Mr. Gillette. He was very famous and was actually primarily the only one that played Sherlock Holmes on stage throughout the world. Now, he was an eccentric fellow for sure inside that castle, which you can tour to this day. It is a state park now. But all the architecture inside is one of a kind. You won't find anything like it in the rest of the world. He even had a model rail, a small narrow gauge train that he would sit on and ride around his property. And many of his residents he took out there.
That's how he
showed them around his land.
I wasn't going to drink the candle.
Even two of his Two of his visitors, let's call it, were Albert Einstein and Charlie Chaplin back in those times. Now, Mr. Gillette died without having any children or a wife to boot, so the land was left to his lawyers when he passed away in 1937. In 1938, the lawyers had a bid of about $35,000, which was a lot of money at the time, for a purchase of that property, all 110 acres, from a New Jersey real estate developer. Now you think that was a shoe-in, especially given that $35,000 is a pretty nice amount of money back then, but that wasn't the case. Mr. Gillette's lawyers unfortunately declined to sell the land to this New Jersey real estate developer for the simple reason not of their own, due to the fact that Mr. Gillette in his will wrote specifically, quote, "I will not let my land fall into the hands of any blithering saphead," end quote. True story, that is 100% true. The land was, again, held onto by his lawyers and the executors of his will. 5 years after that, though, it was sold to the state of Connecticut, and they did a wonderful job. They turned it into a state park, Gillette's Castle State Park. If you go across the East Haddam Bridge and go across the river, you can drive right up to Gillette's Castle, tour the property. It's beautiful. Prior to COVID-19, the railroad would have an option called the Castle Connection. The coach train, the steam train, which we just passed, would drop you off up here at the Hadline flag stop to get to the yellow building that we're just about going to pass now. And the train would let you off. You'd walk down the street called Ferry Road. You'd take the Chester Hadline ferry across the Connecticut River. You'd hike up to Gillette's Castle. It's not a strenuous hike, not tough terrain at all. You could tour the property, just walk around, enjoy the hike, and hike back down the mountain, or the hill, I should say. Take the ferry back across and catch the last train of the day back to Essex. Definitely a wonderful day trip, and it does beat just driving back and forth.
I think you
Nice
teleported.
with the ride across the river on the Chester Hadline ferry is also an experience. That ferry is actually the second oldest ferry in the United States still in operation. The oldest is actually up in north on the Connecticut Valley Railroad line, but north of Middletown, Glastonbury, Rocky Hill, and Cromwell area. And you got a nice view as we pass the crossing there, full front view of the Gillette's Castle. But now we're going to sneak inland for a little bit through a series of S-curves. Be about 1.5 to 2 miles before we get up to East Haddam, where we'll get to our second scenic overlook and meet the Connecticut River again. We'll pass a couple marinas along the way, nice scenery, but it will be mostly trees. Entrees are coming out at this time, so I'll let you folks enjoy the food. Hope the first couple bites are good and delicious and to your liking. For those of you in the Meriden, and I believe the Wallingford will start momentarily. So enjoy the entrees, folks. I'll come back to you once we're up at East Haddam at the Broadway Scenic Overlook.
House lights came up. Huh?
Make it dark here.
Yeah. You think it'll be full dark before we get back?
Like,
Yeah, sure.
Spots of the Connecticut River from the east bank to the west bank. And if you look across, that is the town of East Haddam. And that's the East Haddam Swing Bridge, which spans over 800 feet long. And at its time of construction and completion back in 1913, it was the longest swing bridge in the world. It was quickly surpassed after that. But it ended ferry service from that location, from connecting the small town of Tylerville to East Haddam. I believe ferry service dated back all the way to 1694 at that time. So ferry service was no longer needed once the bridge was completed back in 1913. In 2013, the bridge celebrated its 100th birthday. The town threw a big parade with the Grand Marshal, and it was they decked out the town in centennial wear and paraded right across the bridge with a fife and drum corps, as well as a boat parade that came through the Connecticut River. Now, off to the right of the bridge, that white building with the two spires, that's the Goodspeed Opera House. The Goodspeed Opera House was opened and built by William Goodspeed, who was a banker and real estate developer. Back in 1877, he finished and completed and opened the Goodspeed Opera House. And it was open for about 12 years until his death in 1888. And unfortunately, at the time of his death and following his death, finances became a problem with the Goodspeed Opera House. It was no longer profitable, fell into disrepair, and was closed shortly after that. There is, though, a lot of uniqueness with the theater in itself. The theater, where the performances are held, are actually on the top 2 floors of the Opera House. And the bottom floor was initially a riverboat terminal. And William Goodspeed wanted boat passengers and patrons to come off their boats, whether they were privately chartered or public riverboat service, to hop off their boats and be ushered up a grand staircase into the theater and enjoy a performance before hopping back on their boats to bring them back to the towns that they had lived in. Now, as I mentioned, the Opera House did close shortly after William Goodspeed's death in the late 1800s. It remained that way until about 1960. It was 1960s, mid-1960s, somewhere around there. But during that time, the Opera House was a World War I militia base, and even became a storage facility for the Department of Transportation for the state of Connecticut during the rehab of the Middlesex Turnpike, Route 154, and the construction of Route 9, running down from Hartford all the way to Saybrook. Now, the Goodspeed Opera House was reopened. It was really, in large part, due to some theater aficionados and historians that were local to the area. They raised a ton of money to refurbish and restore the Goodspeed Opera House, and she's actually better than ever at this point. It's been well over 50 years of hosting shows there, and they've been extremely successful.
There's definitely a stick or something.
This is one of the years that they're unable to perform due to the pandemic, but they're actually exploring some virtual shows that have been made available online. So if you are interested, check that out on their website. Another neat fact about the Opera House is that it's actually hosted 0 operas, even dating back to when William Goodspeed completed that in 1877. It's primarily been used for musical theater. A couple shows that you may have heard of: Annie, Man of La Mancha, and Shenandoah. They all got their start and made their premieres right there at the Goodspeed Opera House here in our little corner of East Haddam in New London County. And for those of you that don't know, Annie, Man of La Mancha, and Shenandoah, all 3 made it to the bright lights in Big City on Broadway. I think it's kind of funny that those plays made it to Broadway, and this curve overlook was actually named Broadway, but that, I believe, is not the reason why this location has found that name. Off to the right of the Opera House is the Goodspeed Airport, and off to the left of the swing bridge is actually Goodspeed Station. That's where we'll be going. We'll actually be right almost about 300 feet away from the swing bridge. You'll get a very nice look at it. Maybe even it'll open depending on the boat traffic tonight. And you'll get a nice look at the Opera House as we roll into the yard. So what's going to happen is Engineer Harold is going to take the train north for about another mile or so, We're going to cross River Street or Bridge Street, Route 82, which is the road that East Adams Swing Bridge connects. The train's going to come to a nice stop, and the locomotive will uncouple, run around to the opposite end, and then Harold will pull us home from the south end of the train back to Essex. I'll be assisting with that, and I believe most of your meals have come out. Middletown should be on its way if you have not already received it. So enjoy the entrees, folks. They look delicious. And I'll come back to you folks once we're heading south back to Essex in about 25 to 30 minutes or so. So we're heading north, last stop, Goodspeed Station.